This is Jason Thomas. Most of you that listen to these clips probably know me as a musician and composer, which is what I consider myself to be. But there was a point in time, by accident, that I was doing stand-up comedy for a couple of years. And I thought it would be good to, A, tell that story, and B, kind of go over a few of the small differences between those two worlds. I'll give you my background into that world, and it involved me at one point in time being involved in a financial services firm that I was employed at during the mortgage meltdown that happened in 2007-8 initially, and then lasted a few years after that. That was a large economic downturn at the time. And I was at one of the main players in that downturn at the time. And I did not lose the job that I had, but I knew that the writing was on the wall. It was kind of like being on deck at the Titanic after the iceberg. And I was faced with the decision of, well, what to do from that point on, because I had finished as far as I intended to go with a graduate school in composition out here, and I didn't want to go back to working in film music because I just didn't want to mess around with the computer all day, which is what that kind of field had focused on from the employment opportunities available. And I thought, let me try to sell out and make some money and go into this arena, which was not the best timing in the world to do that. So I knew that things were going to be rough in that field for a couple of years until the economy came back to some sense of normalcy. And I was walking down Sunset Boulevard to meet a friend of mine at a Mexican restaurant that we were going to eat at. And this was at a point in time where there was a small cafe called Abbott's Habit. It's not even there anymore. It was near where there is a Guitar Center and the Sunset Grill from the song of the same name. And there happened to be some people setting up. And I went up to the guy that was running the show, and I said, hey, when does this start? And he said, I'm all booked for today. I can get you on next week. And I just wanted to watch. I just thought there was going to be some comedy of some kind, and I wasn't trying to get on. I had no material. I had no interest in doing comedy. I'd just been a fan. And I said, okay, what's your name? And we exchanged names, and he told me to come there next week. And I thought, as I was walking away, fuck it, I'm going to do this. So it took me, a few days to come up with 3 to 5 minutes worth of material, which is I assumed is what he would give me when I came back. And I wrote some stuff out and practiced it to the extent that I pretty much had it memorized. And I thought, this is going to be sufficient for this thing. So I go back a week later, meet the same guy, wait around for a few other people. And it was it was a cluster of a show, to say the least. There was somebody that has a Comedy Central show now that was on Vicodin at the time and talking about that. There was some other guy that was talking about having just gotten out of jail and relaying that experience. And it was definitely a colorful cast, to say the least. And I did my material. There were 3 people there. One of them was high on something. It was an uneventful presentation, but I did okay, and I thought, oh, okay, well, I got that one out of the way. So I called a friend of mine who was someone that I had done security with years ago when I first got out and just needed a job. I was here before I was working with a film composer in 1999, and we just happened to be working the same third shift security job. And this guy was a stand-up, and he'd been on Howard Stern many times, and he'd done some other stuff, but like myself, we just had a day, or in that case, night job, third shift at night. And I kept in touch with him every now and then. I called him up and I said, hey, man, I just did my first stand-up set. Because we used to talk about his stand-up stuff when he was kind of still a little more heavily into it and lived in L.A. before moving to the East Coast. And he said, oh, that's great, man. I got somebody you should talk to. And he gave me a number of this guy, Vic Dunlop. And Vic was an old school LA comic. He had written for Richard Pryor. He had done a lot of writing after being somewhat successful as a stand-up. I don't think he had specials and stuff of his own. Because, he was a regular at all the clubs and got to that level before going into the writing situation. I remember when he died, they had, as is customarily the case, R.I.P. Vic Dunlop, Make God Laugh on the marquee at the Laugh Factory when I was driving by. That's how I actually found out that he died a couple years later. But in any case, I called him up, and he was running a show that was a booked set, which was a big deal at the time. Hey, this is my second set I've ever had, and it's a booked one, rather than waiting around for an open mic. And he said, oh, yeah, you want to come up to Valencia and do this show? I said, sure. So I went and I did this show at a bowling alley. He gave me, 10 minutes, and by this time I'd written a little bit more and had up to that point in time. And I thought, hey, this is fun. This is going somewhere. Some of the people from the Abbott's Habit set had told me I should come over to another place that was called, actually I can't remember what it was called, but it was a well-known black venue. And that's a bit of a different environment for comedy. And the Bliss Cafe, that's what it was called. By the way, this is New Year's Eve, and I've had a few glasses of wine thus far, so I thought this would be something interesting to talk about. So my my memory is not as it would otherwise be, but I thought it would be a good environment to kind of discuss this situation. So I went and I started doing sets. And I started hanging out with a friend of mine that was also getting into it. And we would go try to do 2 or 3 sets a night where if we could. We were getting up every day. I had enough money to get by for, a brief period of time once the firm that I was at went under. And I thought, rather than go back to something, who knows what's going to get merged out of existence or go out of business again itself, let me just do something else until this blows over. So I just saw this as something kind of fun to do for a year or so, or however long it took. And I did. I started getting into the rotation. I was up till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning every night, hanging out at the Comedy Store at the end of the night, just doing all of the usual routine. I met a lot of interesting people that were, some of whom were successful in that field. Now, I never had any aspiration of being successful in that. I always thought, if anything, this is taking time away from my real, quote-unquote, work as a composer that I was trying to get done. But I saw this as a very involved hobby and a very good way to spend that year and a very good time that I would look back on. And I thought it would be interesting to kind of talk for a moment about some of the differences between musicians and stand-up comics. And when I say musicians, primarily as a composer, but, either way, perform whatever it is that you do. One of the things that struck me is the different attitude towards form that comics and composers, for example, have. Now, comics keep doing bits until they get the light, pretty much. I mean, they may have a goal of sorts along the way. And I always listened very carefully when I heard people talk about how they wrote. And it seems like most comics are writing at the bit level. They think of the joke or the bit that might be a little bit longer. But beyond that, it's just, well, which one of these self-contained things do I put in order? And the exception to that, which I heard from an interview, is George Carlin, who said that the word processor changed the way that he wrote. And when you listen to one of his later specials, you can definitely tell it. And I'm talking about Back in Town or Life is Worth Losing or It's Bad for You or anything after, I think we're talking mid-90s and later up until he died. You can tell that he took things to a new level from that angle and thought of the overall form of his set or special or whatever he was doing in a lot of the same way that a musician might who is a composer in some circumstances. The one thing that I would say would be a plus on the comic side is that they do have a work ethic of getting up all the time, getting up as much as you can. Multiple times a night, preferable if you're in a major city like Los Angeles and New York, to do stand-up. You want to be doing it and refining it as much as possible, whereas a lot of musicians will work their material up to the night of a particular goal performance, and that might be the only one or one of a few. But the flip side of that is that they actually do have a practice ethic that is a little bit different than the work ethic of the comic. One thing that I found a little irritating about the stand-up world is that you would see people openly, hey, I'm just working this out. Hey, I got a Tonight Show this week, or hey, I got a special coming up. I'm just fixing this. I'm working this stuff out. And they would even refer to some of the clubs in town as their gym, which I always thought was a little bit not only disrespectful to whatever audience it was that had shown up to that, but displayed an attitude that assumed there was no necessity to practice in any other set. And what was even worse than that was that it presumed that one would be taking that feedback and altering the material in real time. Not to go off too much on Carlin, but he had said the exact opposite, that you have to know what it is that you want, then do it, and if people don't like it, you have to be confident enough in whatever it is that you're doing to disregard that real-time feedback, because anybody that's done the same set a handful of times can tell, even if you did want to appease an audience with that, you would be unable to, because you will get 5 different responses from 5 different crowds and would not really be able to do so. I will say that the stand-up world has a different sense of relevance and immediacy. Somebody writes something that day and is performing it that night, or figures out what they're going to do just beforehand. There's kind of an immediacy of it. And whereas you can be a very high-end musician or composer and be totally unknown to the public, it's unlikely that you're going to reach a high level of success where that is the case in the stand-up world. I always appreciated the kind of getting their hands dirty of the stand-up world. Just a bit of kind of context when stand-up became when LA became the stand-up center of the country versus New York is when the Tonight Show, when Johnny Carson was the host, moved out here. And you can read about that in I'm Dying Up Here, one of the books about the history of the Comedy Store and kind of the scene out here with the clubs moving, in the case of the Improv, or starting up in the case of the Store, and the Factory, and some of the other places that were here. And there is a sense of relevance and immediacy, and that, hey, something can connect right away, somebody can make it overnight. And that sense really isn't there in the same way in the music world, or at least the avenue of the music world that I was focusing on. So it was definitely an interesting experience, totally different than the one that I was used to. And the point that I was going to get at a moment ago about stand-up comics being willing to get their hands dirty and get in to just straight to work is that it was always seen as kind of the blue-collar route, whereas the people coming from the East Coast out to LA that had, good academic pedigrees or whatever were going to be writers for sitcoms. And the people that were just funny and would have gotten kicked out of any academic institution they would have looked at would become stand-ups. And there was a bit of a dichotomy there, and maybe the improv people being somewhere in the middle of those two things. And I think that that's kind of eroded away. I've always talked about the maybe too much wine to pull this word off, but the academic nature. I was going to go with something a bit more complex. The academic nature of music composition has not necessarily been favorable to the music that has resulted from that in some aspects. And I've always said to friends that know me in that environment that I hope that never happens to stand-up comedy again. I hope people are not getting theater degrees with a stand-up focus or something, because it will immediately turn that field into exactly what music composition has become from that viewpoint. But in any case, it's a vibrant environment. I always think of what Pierre Boulez said about pop music when he was asked about it. And he said, well, I appreciate the excitement. I appreciate, walking into, at that point in time when he said that, there was a Tower Records or records in general. And I can understand what he was saying. I mean, my time in the stand-up world kind of showed me what is not in the world of modern music or art music or whatever you want to call it. And some of those things are good, some of them are bad. But I think it's always interesting to kind of get a different perspective on what it is that you're doing and experience what someone else in the arts in a different discipline has going on. My time doing that lasted a little over a year, maybe close to 2 years, and then things changed back in the economy, and I got back into the profession that I was in previously, and just naturally started doing a little less than I was before. People have asked me, why not anymore? Do I want to do stand-up anymore? And I made the decision, you cannot be all things to all people, and you can't be really good at everything and devote any significant material amount of time to multiple things at once. I really enjoyed my time doing it. Got to hang out at the coolest clubs in LA for stand-up, got to meet a lot of people before they were big and some people when they were, and hear them talk about how they were developing what they were doing, see a ton of great shows. I got sued on Judge Karen's court by an Elvis impersonating clown. I filmed a number of clips that you can see me in. I mean, I had a good time, and it was definitely fun. And I look back at that time with kind of a nostalgic viewpoint, because it was one of the few points in life that was even better because I look back at being able to take something that was a major downturn from a career standpoint, and at least make something out of it that I definitely would not trade for any point in time. Every once in a while, somebody needs to fill a time slot somewhere, and they'll ask me, and I'll work something up. But I would never be in the state of current practice to do something long and sustained, like most people do need to be in a recurring performance environment in order to keep a set alive, to keep something performance ready. And it gave me a lot of respect for the people that are able to do that, because I kind of see the amount of work that they had to put into it and the amount of practice to keep something up to speed and get it to the point of being ready, especially when you're doing something of a longer variety. So that was definitely something that I still enjoy as a viewer and still, a participant on the audience side. But I doubt that I will be actively participating in that anymore. I'm glad to see some of the people that I saw, make something happen, have some success in TV and get specials and things like that. I'm trying to keep the main thing and get back to even writing down and finishing some pieces that are just in kind of disarray. And, as I've mentioned in other discussions, time is not easy to come by. And I think adding one more thing to the mix would just make that even more difficult. But every now and then I think back at those couple of years and really view it in a positive and fun light. So that's my small take on just entering the stand-up world briefly as a musician. Thanks for listening. This is Jason Thomas.